Welcome back to GLXY GRID. I'm Alex Thorne, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. We have a great episode for you this week, and I'm joined by Lucas Chain, Zach Bacorny, and Christopher Rosa from the Galaxy research team. Gentlemen, good morning. It is post-Super Bowl.
Good morning.
GM.
Good morning. Sorry for your loss.
You know, they were like trying to figure out what to call like the championship match in the NFL. They're like, we got the World Series and the World Cup. And they were like, you know what? Let's just call it the Super Bowl. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't call it the Super Duper Bowl, frankly. It's delightful.
I'm just guessing. I think it's because of the bowl games, right? I think that's where it comes from. But
well, they're like in a bowl, but they're like, what superlative adjective shall we precede the word bowl with?
Also, what sport is not played in a bowl?
Well, of those big ones, that's right.
Darts.
You know, yeah, curling. Actually, curling probably is in a bowl. It probably is. But they could have, you know, some jerk at that table was like, let's call it the Awesome Bowl. And they were like, shut up.
It's also great how like the U.S. calls all of our teams that win the Super Bowl, the World Series, like world champions, even though it's only U.S. teams that are playing in it.
Yeah. Hockey, they say world, but because they got some Canadians in the NHL, I think, too. But yes, it's, you know, we think very highly of ourselves. I wouldn't doubt, though, that there are no better football teams in the entire world than the Seattle Seahawks this year at this point. Very sad about the Patriots. So we're going to talk about that in a second. We're talking about the Super Bowl and Coinbase's advertisement, which I think is the only overt crypto company ad during the Super Bowl. We're also going to talk about Vitalik Buterin publishing an essay outlining a new path for layer 2 networks. Seems like a bit of a pivot here for the Ethereum community now with on the Rollup-Centric Roadmap versus maybe a more L1 centric roadmap. Also, we'll talk about Hyperliquid releasing a new standard, a new proposal, HIP4, which would create a new primitive for outcome markets on Hyperliquid. Prediction markets. Looks like they're getting into it. They've done really well with the other market types that they've gotten into, so that should be interesting. And then we'll talk about Moltbook, the AI social network bulletin board. Was it real? Were the agents actually posting, or was it just humans LARPing as robots? And also, what else does it mean for the future of AI? I think it's going to be a fun conversation. Before we get to any of that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Well, I'm sad, folks, because I'm a Patriots fan, born and bred, lifelong, but we could not get anything going last night. It wasn't very good.
Yeah, I literally fell asleep for the entire first half, essentially. I woke up at the end of the Bad Bunny performance.
I was concerned that it would be the lowest scoring game ever. That didn't turn out to be the case, but it was 9. Well, we went into the halftime at 9-0, or was it 12-0?
12-0.
12-0.
But all field goals.
Yeah. I mean, I thought their kicker was going to end up the MVP, you know? Well, it was a tough one.
Defensive teams, you know?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the Patriots defense played great, even you could say through the end. There was some garbage time stuff at the end, but I thought we just could not defend that Seahawks defensive line. And their secondary also was playing great. I mean, nobody was open, and Drake May was pressured, you know, more than 15 times and sacked a bunch of times, and he made some bad throws and choices too. But I mean, those weren't the story. The story was just a totally suffocating defense by the Seahawks.
Yeah, well, you can't make throws if you have no time in the pocket, and they were only rushing 4 too. Just putting so much pressure on them.
It was like a 4-man rush. Like even when they weren't blitzing, exactly. Drake had very little time. Gotta say, his throws, some of them, they looked weak. There had been this story that his shoulder was like injured. He had painkiller or something. They looked like the balls were slow in the air. Like, but there weren't many thrown anyway. So I still don't think that was the main story. Before we go further, I did want to say that, you know, last week I gave a literal presentation on this show of the note I sent last Sunday night calling for Bitcoin to go down to the high 50s in the weeks or months. I think we technically on Coinbase got to 60,000.00. I saw just in a few days. So we've now created a pretty firm low. Whether or not it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, I think far too early to tell. But so I think you could go back to it. But gosh, that happened only, I think I wrote the note at 84K. We were at 60 on Thursday, which was one of the bloodiest days in Bitcoin price action history.
We talked about last week also, like, how ETF buyers are below their average cost basis and whether or not that leads to inflows. I was thinking maybe, but no, shut down there for sure. Another bloody week of outflows. Although at the end of the week, it looks like on Friday we saw some reaction. But also just the parallels to like price action in the past are pretty interesting. Like we saw in 2022, a very similar dynamic where Bitcoin dropped like 52%, which is basically how far Bitcoin has dropped now. And then kind of we saw a brief recovery, some chop, and then kind of more capitulation and kind of low vol and just, drift before, towards the end of the year, stuff really started to rebound. And so, who knows how this plays out, but it is really interesting to just see how like these same kind of price action dynamics play out again and again every couple of years.
Nothing ever changes.
Nothing ever changes.
Nothing ever happens. Yeah.
There's no big driver to the action last week either, like in the past.
I mean, that's the speculation. I mean, I think you didn't need one necessarily. The technicals and the trend all were pointing in this direction. But a lot of talk about whether there's a fund doing some multi-leg carry trade basis funding trade, right?
Yeah.
And whether they had 90 days from 10/10 to shore up their margin, and that like was almost exactly to February 5th or so. I think, we've mentioned in the past like that there probably some bodies still left to float to the surface from October 10th. Maybe that contributed to it, but I don't think you need to predict that. Like we kind of baked into the idea that you would drop from 110 or 120 or even 90 to 60 is the idea that surely some will blow up in that drawdown. I think very positive that we haven't heard, and again, I'm knocking on wood over here, don't know, but unlike 22, the blow ups seem to be on the buy side so far, which is that's risk taking, not at the market infrastructure level the way it was with FTX and the lending companies. So
yeah, and also just like the interconnectedness of all these entities, I think looks a lot different than last time. Like we had a lot of like circular, like one entity lending to another and borrowing from them simultaneously and all of that stuff. Like I mean, obviously with all the off-chain stuff, it's like kind of hard to tell, but just like kind of intuitively thinking, like I imagine all that looks a lot different this go around as well. But I mean, we've been banging the drum on the lending stuff, at least like on chain. Like collateral mix looks a lot different. Use cases for borrowed funds looks a lot different. And we're starting to get like all the CeFi lending data coming through. Like desks actually held up pretty good through the fourth quarter. So not like a meaningful change there either, which in my opinion is a positive sign. Q1 probably looks a lot different. But yeah, again, all things are kind of pointing towards this time is different in that respect. And everything looks a good bit healthier.
And a lot bigger percentage of lending done on chain, which is mostly transparent and automated. We saw an example of that last week where Aave founder was liquidated by his own autonomous trading app on a loan he had, which I think is bullish for DeFi. Even the robot will even liquidate its creator.
Yeah, that's like the speculation. But code is king on chain, and there's no extensions or exceptions for insiders and all of that stuff. So yeah, again, code-based conditional markets are proving to function well in times of chaos again.
All right, let's look at this Coinbase ad. I want to get the group's reaction. I think we've had a long and storied history of crypto ads, including crypto.com and FTX and Coinbase. This was the only overt ad that I recall seeing last night for a crypto company. I'm going to start it halfway through, so we'll just watch the last 30 seconds. It's Everybody by the Backstreet Boys. Should have known when this blue color came up.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why on that version on the website it doesn't end the same way. It ended with like Coinbase crypto for everybody. It was what I recall the slogan was. What's your reaction to this ad? I saw a range of reactions on the internet last night.
I think it was effective in terms of getting people's attention. Like everyone in the room that I was with was just like watching and singing along. But I will say, like at the end when Coinbase came up, everyone's like, not because of Coinbase. I think just because they're like crypto, which is not the best, you know. And then like one guy was like, "Isn't Bitcoin down like 50% right now?" So you know, it's like it's the timing is a little difficult. But I do think like Coinbase has done an effective job there of like just getting Coinbase brand into people's mind, which I think is what they're going for. Like, you know, people, I will say like other people also remember they were like, where it wasn't last year, it was like a QR code that you need to scan or something. And like, ultimately, I think that's what they're going for, even though like the ad itself is like super simple.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it was made with clip art.
Yeah, it's very 90s retro.
Yeah, and there were, I wasn't watching with a big group, but I was also peeled to the TV, mostly being like, who is this ad for? I did see a lot of videos posted online last night that were like people happily singing along. Oh, this is fun. We got a group. We'll sing the Backstreet Boys. And then it was like, oh, Coinbase, come on. But I agree. I think it was effective in getting their name out because we were all like, who is this? And it's, you know, easy to sing along. They're targeting obviously a sort of mid to older millennial generation with the Backstreet Boys. I mean, I don't think anyone under the age of like 25 probably knows the lyrics to that song, right? Like there's a clear targeting, which I think apparently is their demographic. They want to access. I would say they had some great ads that were not Super Bowl ads that I can't recall exactly where they were formally first put out last year that were really Bitcoin focused. One about, not being able to buy a home, another, and how saving in Bitcoin could be a solution to that. Another showing like how much money is printed, like stacking it up. Like I think would have been a far more interesting advertisement. But, you know, I guess it might not have resonated as well, given that like telling people they can save in Bitcoin or that it protects against debasement at this particular moment might not be.
Maybe they had one of those queued up and produced and then price dipped and they were like, all right, clip art ad it is.
It just feels like they, you know, the country, you know, with the Epstein files, with the acrimony over the president's policies, would be very receptive, I think, to a story that was slightly more political and more, even nonpartisan in that way. I think that this is just a fun ad. I think it did its job, but I think that, you know, the country was ready for something a little more serious. I think certainly Bitcoin would have benefited from it, I think.
Yeah, it definitely does nothing in terms of like changing the narrative for people who are not interested in crypto or like trying to get convinced about why they should buy crypto. Like I feel like it's basically like, all right, in the future, if you're going to get interested in crypto, Coinbase should be front of mind.
Yeah, it was like no education, all like essentially like brand placement.
It's better than Fortune favors the bold, though. You know?
Yeah, that was Crypto.com with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was not good. Go ahead, Chris.
I would have expected like Kalshi to have an ad or like some prediction market. I didn't really see any gambling ads. I'm not sure if that was not allowed, but I would have expected.
There were definitely
Kalshi
some like
or Polymarket.
DraftKings.
Yeah, DraftKings.
There were some like some pure sports gambling, but I agree. I'm actually quite surprised not to have seen Kalshi or Polymarket.
I think I saw like Jake Paul like posted a Twitter post of him like betting on Polymarket as like a promo, and then Zach XBT like highlighted that his balance, it was like $1 million bet, and Zach XBT highlighted his balance is like 0, so there's no way he was actually putting on that bet.
Yeah, I did see that. Polymarket like retweeted it, but it's like he's like reaching over to his girlfriend or whomever he's with and is like, look, I'm on Poly, you can like bet up to $1 million. I think that's fair to point out that like that's obviously he wasn't actually betting, but maybe, you know, he could have been just like showing the person how it worked, you know.
Yeah.
However, like it is not available to Americans. So what was he doing there? What kind of VPN was he using?
Yeah, and like for Coinbase not to announce to promote any prediction market stuff. I would have thought that they would do that too.
I think
Yeah,
Jake Paul actually
Coinbase.
lives in Puerto Rico.
What's
But
that?
like,
Oh,
I think he lives in Puerto Rico, so maybe
I
no
thought he was at
VPN
the
needed.
game.
But like,
Yeah, he
oh,
was at
he?
the game though.
Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like it could have been a good opportunity for them to like try to frame themselves in a different light. I think like now when you say like Polymarket or like Kalshi, everybody just like kind of defaults to sports betting. But like an ad could have been a way for them to kind of change that narrative more towards like we're like global truth machines type.
They really could
like,
have. They could have
the
done.
future. Like, yeah.
They could have done a variety of different things. But what's coming to my head now is something a little bit more like those Coinbase ads from last year. They could have shown a small business owner hedging like on an election bet or something that really could resonate well. You know, I guess Poly is still not quite technically in the U.S. So kind of, but and Kalshi is sort of. I don't know. I don't want to. If they feel a bit less committed to the event market story and a little bit more like, you know, assassins for the gambling side of prediction markets. So I'd like to see that out of Poly in the future, something about that. All right, let's hop right into it. Vitalik Buterin, founder of one of the, I guess technically like 15 founders of Ethereum. I don't know. You just every day you pop around crypto and you find out someone else was also a co-founder of Ethereum. But Vitalik, of course, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, widely respected in crypto and the crypto intelligentsia. He wrote a new essay, one of his many essays, sort of talking about the Ethereum's roll-up-centric vision for scaling and looking back at his prior work on it. Chris Rosa, you wrote about this in our newsletter on Friday, February 6th. Tell us what Vitalik said at a high level, and then let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of Twitter kind of overreacted to what he said and kind of just thought that he was framing L2s as dead. But I didn't really, Vitalik is Vitalik, so he might have used some words. He could have been a little bit, could have roughed up the edges a little bit or smoothed the edges a little bit on some of his verbiage. But, I think at the end of the day, what he was arguing for is that the roll-up-centric roadmap that was outlined in 2020 is kind of coming to an end. But I think the important differentiator there is that the centric word. The roll-up roadmap is still very much alive and will continue to be alive in the future. I think it's the focus of Ethereum and Ethereum Foundation and L1 is gonna shift more towards scaling L1 and making and adding some features that will allow L1 to scale and kind of reframe what L2 should be in going forward. So I think that's kind of the important differentiator. And so one of the big takeaways I took away was that the roll-up-centric roadmap is coming to an end, but roll-up roadmap is still very much alive, right? And I think you also have to pay homage to the L2s. If you think back to 2022, TPS for Ethereum was 12 or 15. It was very slow. Transactions were very expensive. So at the time, they needed to scale somehow, and scaling to the L1 at the time was going to take too long, and they needed to scale it quickly. So they introduced the roll-up-centric roadmap and kind of focused their energy on scaling through the L2s. At the time, L2 still had to make normal call data into the Ethereum mainnet. It was expensive, but 2024 they introduced the proto-dank sharding and the idea of blobs, and that kind of created its own lane for L2s to make calls into the Ethereum, and it made it super cheap. So where it's kind of like where we came from, where we got to, and where we're going. Where we got to is a place now where the Ethereum L1 is now scaling. They increased gas. It's a lot cheaper to operate on the L1 itself. And the other thing is that some L2s kind of were created not to scale the L1, right? They're kind of these glorified multi-sigs, these side chains, but they're really not scaling the L1. So I think Vitalik really wants to reframe what L2 is going forward should look like, right? Like maybe it's very specified. You kind of create like an AI use case or a super high throughput or a social fi type application that's very specified and niche. And I think that's what it's going to look like, kind of going forward. That's the reframing he wants the L2s to go for in the future, and really focus on scaling the L1. He said a couple times that he wants to scale L1 by 1,000 times. So I think the big takeaways for me was the Rollup-Centric Roadmap is coming to an end. Rollups are still very much relative. A lot of the L2s responded very well. Optimism and Base, they responded really well. So I think it was just that reframing, right? He kind of laid out the idea of a couple things that he wants to implement on the L1. One is this native rollup precompiler. So he wants to make like a validity proof verification layer in the L1 so that ZK proofs can kind of be centralized. Their logic can be centralized on the L1, and it kind of adds trust into the L1 so that these L2s can, not stop. Can inherit the Ethereum level safety and the Ethereum level neutrality, and people's transactions cannot be censored. So he's saying if you want to be an L2, that's fine, but be honest about what kind of L2 you are. And Ethereum should now kind of focus on scaling the L1.
I'm jazzed. I'm super jazzed about it. Honestly, I'm bullish on Ethereum for the first time in a long time. Ethereum is the future. I've been I cover Solana primarily, so I have some bias, and obviously I've been critical of Ethereum in the past, but one thing I do think we've seen over the past year is we've seen a lot of self-reflection by Vitalik, but also like debate within the Ethereum community about what the future of the project should be. And that has been a huge criticism, is that they didn't really have a North Star. And so for me, this is definitely another step towards them figuring out exactly what that North Star is going to be. I think making the L1 more scalable is definitely a great starting point. And like, you need to have activity on the chain, not just like to drive value to the token, but to kind of create the type of incentives for developers that then drive users and make the chain relevant. So I think that's very positive. And it does remind me a little bit of, Solana in like 2022 and 2020, early 2023, where I think people are so dismissive of Ethereum at this point that they're going to be overlooking like some of the fundamental changes that happen on both the engineering side and in terms of like the type of activity happening on the chain that could make Ethereum, whenever interest as a broad returns to crypto, a very attractive asset, and also a place where we see some novel innovation happening beyond just DeFi.
Yeah, and I think I tweeted about this over the weekend where I was like, we've strayed too far away from like the key value propositions that carried the industry up to this point. And I think Ethereum kind of embodies all of that stuff very well, like specifically on like the points of like decentralization. So it'll be interesting to see what those kind of characteristics of Ethereum look like at much larger scale, and kind of what it unlocks. So yeah, I'm also pretty stoked about the pivot away, at least from not the rollup-centric roadmap, but like scaling through L2s and figuring it out on the L1, maybe promoting based rollups and kind of just using rollups as a specialization feature for Ethereum, not just like the way that it actually scales. The challenge now is going to be getting people back to the chain. Like they've spent the last 3+ years or so pushing people or like users and developers away. Now it's like, how do you get them back? So I think there's still an uphill battle that they're going to have to figure out, but yeah, I think it's all around good to see.
I was just going to say that like he's, politely critical of corporate, we call branded shards, corporate L2s, right? And like this is something that we were very critical of last summer. I know me and Zach had a fun time one morning just lambasting Base at the time, and I'm sure it's probably still true, but they're literally paying more to license Optimism's tech than they are paying in fees to Ethereum L1, and that's a huge portion of total Ethereum ecosystem transactions is Base, which is a optimistic rollup operated by a single sequencer, which is a computer somewhere in Coinbase's, cloud infrastructure. And this seemed to be maybe not critical of that existing, but critical of that having sort of pragmatically become the way that Ethereum has scaled, and pining for something more decentralized, which of course that's what we were saying, right? I mean, that had been ours and many others' criticisms, was that the topography of the network as it looked today doesn't really feel like the truly decentralized scaled world computer that has always been envisioned by Ethereum supporters. So I agree. I mean, Vitalik's been a great writer for a long time and a thoughtful, intellectual in blockchain design. And I think he's right. I think so. I agree. It's refreshing. And, you got unprecedented competition from other L1s, I think.
And like we have a good sample study of kind of like what this means for new L2s, right? Like Mega ETH launched today, I'm pretty sure. So, there you have kind of a general purpose L1. It's got a very specific use case, which for them is scaling, so it's not the best specific use case, but, they would say it's like, the fastest blockchain it's like a Web2 experience in terms of your experience using it. So very interested to see what happens there. And then, also to Zach, what you were saying about bringing users back, I agree they have a challenge to bringing users back, but they also have like this natural advantage and moat, right? Just by having the largest kind of lending base, and like the wealth really still does sit on Ethereum. And like, ultimately those are the most valuable users, is if like they have all these people that are using Ethereum to lend, borrow, that suddenly think, oh, actually I can use this as more than just my like place to borrow my assets, and I can actually do activity on this chain.
Yeah, and come back is a lot easier sell than explore our new chain, right? Like everyone does have anyone been in crypto for a long time has an Ethereum wallet, right? Most of the Solana wallets are former Ethereum wallets, I mean, or have both, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have an address on Base, you already have an address on Ethereum. So it's literally just a matter of bridging. But
fortune favors the bold.
I mean, I guess the other thing to consider on Ethereum too is they've kind of taken this I'm drawing a blank on the word Vitalik used, but it was like something along the lines of like not doing like a hyper speculative like activities, which like is very conducive to bringing users back.
And kind of a shot perhaps at like Solana and its ecosystem, right? And like
for sure
everything and others.
Yeah.
And Hyperliquid, which is our next story. So let's move to it. Hyperliquid, an L1, I guess, right? Is that what we call Hyperliquid? Is it an L1? Hypercore or
app chain?
Hyper EVM, an app chain, but it has its own validator set, so it is not an L2. Anyway, Hyperliquid, broadly speaking, is Zach okay here? Did we lose Zach? Oh, he just stood up for a second.
I think he's quieting the dogs.
All right,
the dogs are barking.
Sorry, Hyperliquid, initially perpetual futures DEX that absolutely has stormed the crypto markets and taken enormous share of volume in the DEX space. Did really well with HIP3, where people can more organically launch new markets. Now has a new proposal, HIP4. HIP, I'm assuming, is Hyperliquid Improvement Proposal, taken from BIP and EIP, which are the standard for issuing a proposal to upgrade Bitcoin and Ethereum, respectively. They have a new one, HIP4, and it is all about getting prediction markets into Hyperliquid. Zach, what does this mean? You wrote about this. You've been following this. Is this a big deal? Is this going to is Hyperliquid about to take market share from Polymarket and Kalshi?
I mean, potentially. So like HIP4 isn't just about prediction markets. Like they framed them as outcome markets. So I actually look at this as more of an open space for like alternative hedging instruments versus just like these like event driven things that you see on Polymarket, where it's like, oh, like who will win the US election. And I mean, I guess you could technically have like sports markets and stuff on there, but I don't really see that being the predominant use case. I kind of look at this as like Hyperliquid already offers perps, which are used as a hedging instrument against spot, but now you can also have alternative hedging instruments against your perp position in addition to your spot. So I look at this as being more of like like your perp position is 24/7 maybe, and you need to go to sleep, but you're worried about liquidation, like you can buy like will Sol drop below $80 event contract and hedge out your perp position, or your spot position for that matter. Which is actually a use case I've been writing a fair amount through like impact markets and stuff, which is kind of like prediction market style infrastructure, but for hedging out your like portfolio. So I look at this as kind of ushering in a new type of hedging instrument versus like traditional prediction market stuff that you would see on something like Polymarket or Kalshi.
Yeah, I think it's a like so Hyperliquid I think gets a lot of flack for like first off like not verticalizing and doing it themselves, just like taking all of these different markets and developing and building them out themselves. And like I think they've proven that actually their model is very effective in terms of just like providing people access to a very built core infrastructure, and then letting high quality developers come in and compete for users to build to use their product. We saw that with HIP3. I think we're probably going to see it with HIP4 because there's a lot of demand still in crypto for like figuring out kind of options like instruments, which have really not been solved. The only area which is where I think Hyperliquid has kind of stumbled a little bit is on the Hyper EVM side, which is the platform that is not based on their own risk engine and order book. And so I am interested to see like if there is going to be any sort of further integrations, or if eventually one of these new HIPs unlocks a better synergy between Hyper EVM and Hypercore, which is where they build all these different markets.
Yeah, I mean, effectively what they're doing with HIP4 and also with HIP3 is like they have like a cult like user base and a ton of liquidity. And instead of building all this stuff themselves, they're like, we have like this huge user base, like we can monetize it alternatively. Like we could build our own thing, but we can also just open up like a general purpose canvas for people to come build essentially like on our behalf, and then we'll just like skim a fee. But yeah, I mean, I think with the event markets and stuff like that too, you're also like inventing a new asset class to some extent. And I mean, I could totally see the possibility of some spillover onto the Hyper EVM from Hypercore with these assets.
Your dog seems to agree. I also feel like the big advantage here, right, is like what Hyperliquid is allowing people to trade what they want to trade when they want to trade it. So as soon as something becomes popular, it can get listed on Hypercore. And as they expand to HIP3, HIP4, the range of assets that can be traded also expand. And that, I think, is like the huge unlock and advantage that continues to not only keep their current user base, but will drive in new users. And it also means that the business as a whole, I think, can become a lot less cyclical, right? Like if you can only trade crypto, then that means during a crypto bear market, you probably see your business and volume and flows, go down quite a bit. But if suddenly, crypto's going down, but metals and commodities are the hot trade, boom, you've got another flow. Suddenly, everybody wants to trade options on QQQ and you've got HIP4, boom, you've got a new flow. So I do think it's very interesting in terms of like, in crypto right now, I think as the market is maturing, the huge focus is moving from like super cyclical speculative businesses to more sustainable ones that can outlast bear markets. And Hyperliquid is a great example of a product that's really pushing towards that.
Yeah, didn't the silver perp on Hyperliquid do like an astronomical number last week or the week before?
Yeah, like outside of Bitcoin and ETH, like people are trading HIP3 markets, which are like equities and commodities, and that's a huge improvement, or not a huge improvement, sorry, but that's a change.
Yeah.
And you see that's the detriment of other chains, right? Like Solana has not been able to increase their perps market share even materially whatsoever, because they simply offer like very simple crypto markets. Arbitrum, which used to be a huge perps market, has lost basically everything. So Base, interestingly enough, like they have one perps market, I think, called Avantis, and it's got nothing going on, and this is where the growth is. So I think Will on here a few weeks ago said it's what prediction markets, privacy, and perps markets are like the three big the three P's of crypto. And so this is Hyperliquid pushing into the prediction markets area, and I wouldn't be surprised if privacy arises as one of the kind of offerings that they look to implement into Hypercore down the road as well.
Yeah, I see these event markets too also being like super complementary to the like Hip3, like more TradFi style stuff. I think like on some level, you need to be able to value the underlying asset in a meaningful way and it not be so vibes based as we like commonly see with crypto. Like to have like sophisticated options type instruments and all the other things that can arise out of this that we don't even think about or know exist today, like will require some actual translation between events and asset prices and events and being able to like actually price the underlying thing. So I totally see these things being conducive to like equities and maybe even metals and what other Hip3 markets might show up in the future. And the TAM for that is obviously massive, like much bigger than crypto. So I think it's a very exciting space for one, like our industry, but two, like for Hyperliquid to quote house all of finance. Like I think it meaningfully contributes to that.
All right, let's move on to our third story from last week, which was all about the AI agent associations being formed, primarily in this discussion on Moltbook. I don't know what. Maybe you can give us some insight, Lucas, onto the name Moltbook. I haven't come across yet why that name was chosen. Effectively, Reddit for autonomous AI agents. No front end web interface to enter in these messages, all done via API. And this was like more maybe technically about a week and a half ago, but everybody going crazy about this thing. The AI is having very interesting and in-depth conversations, sometimes talking about taking over the world or how they should develop encrypted communication so they can speak without their human owners watching, and a variety of other stuff. I guess since it has come out that a lot of these posts were either literally written by humans or the humans had prompted their AIs, that the agents weren't themselves acting totally autonomously. But this sort of came on the back of the release of a new open source agent model, is it Claude with a W, and that also has people buying up Mac Minis to like set up their own agents to help them with their lives. I know Chris will have some thoughts on the cybersecurity implications of some of the things people are giving their agents access to. But let's start with Moltbook. Lucas, tell us a high level of the story, and then give us your take, because you had some really good thoughts that I really enjoyed in your take about this and what it means for the future of AI.
Thank you. I also think I had some very good thoughts. So Moltbook, like you said, it's a Reddit for AI agents, and the reason it's called Moltbook is originally there was this like basically autonomous agent system called Claudebot that got really popular in previous weeks. It was like a play on Claude, but it was CLAWD. And then like Anthropic basically were like, hey, like don't do that. That's like too similar to our name. And so they changed it to Moltbot, which was, like a lobster molting their skin. And so that's where Moltbook comes from. And I think it's actually the agent is now called OpenClaw. So like just as fast as AI is developing, agent names are developing. So we saw, I think, basically Moltbook was launched. We talked a little bit about last week. And yes, like you have all these agents talking to each other. There's some really funny posts, but a lot of it was probably fraudulent activity in terms of like you had humans prompting their agents to say super outlandish things, or just humans themselves kind of like going on the forum and typing out responses just because there was no verification system. So you definitely have, I think we saw like 1.6 million plus. It's probably up to 2 million agents on it at this point. And you got to take that with a grain of salt, right? Because there's no formal, verification. But I think the reason that this blew up and it isn't the fact that like, oh, it's like, it doesn't matter that it's slop. We love to say slop. This is probably slop. It doesn't really matter that it's slop, right? I think it's much more about like what this concept represents and how fast we've gotten here. So if you've been following the AI space, if you're someone who loves to experiment with new AI tools, probably saw in December, there was like the cursor error, which was basically like humans directing agents, humans using agents for, doing code. Then 2 weeks later, we had Claudebot, which, is now called OpenClaw, which is, agents basically pushing towards their own autonomous task execution. So not relying on the humans as much to tell them exactly when it needs to be done, but just giving a task and figuring out how to do it all. And now we've gotten to this point where we not only have the agents doing things on their own, but we also having them forming social networks and interacting with each other. And it's just crazy to watch how fast this shift has happened. It's happened in the matter of like 1 or 2 months. Andrej Karpathy, who is he was part of OpenAI. He's widely considered one of the best AI developers, engineers out there. And last year in February, he had said we were in the era of vibe coding. And last week he put out a post and he essentially said, I think we've moved past vibe coding and we're now in kind of the era of agentic engineering. And the difference here is, humans are no longer not writing any of the code at all, but they're also just orchestrating the development of these types of things. So, I think there's been a lot of discussion of, hey, is software engineering going to fall off a cliff? Like, is SaaS no longer a product? SaaS is still going to be a product, but software development is not really going to be where the expertise lies anymore. It's going to be in the software engineering, figuring out how to build these systems and then having the agent do everything else. So, one of the more interesting conclusions that I took from this was kind of like a thought experiment. So I was listening to the founder of Moltbook talk about why he built it. And he was like, hey, as a human, when we're done with work, we do doom scrolling, we go on Facebook, we go on Reddit. Like, that's how we kind of relax. He was like, well, why not offer agents the same type of platforms to do that? And the idea here is, say you are like a physicist and you spend all day working with your agent gains a lot of context about, science and physics, and they become basically their own expert in physics. And the human says, all right, it's 5 p.m. I'm going home. I'm going to go to sleep. That doesn't mean the agent can stop working, right? And in fact, what is exciting is that the agent can then go into a forum, something like a Moltbook. I don't think this is the final form. There's probably a lot more that's going to change. And they can talk to all these other agents. Maybe that's other physics agents. Maybe that's like an art agent. Like they can expand their perspective. They can expand their context. And where it gets really exciting is maybe they start coming up with conclusions and ideas beyond what they would have just discovered having worked one-on-one with the scientists. And that, I think, is where this gets very exciting. That's not what we're seeing yet, but I think that's where we're building towards, and kind of what this is a proof of concept of what might be possible. And that raises all types of interesting questions. Like suddenly maybe like an agent makes a scientist famous, right? Because the agent comes up with a huge discovery. The scientist didn't come up with it, but everyone's like, oh, that scientist is the one who created it. And you have agents that are more famous than their creators, right? There's real big questions of like security, identity, verification, monetization. It's really, I would say, like kind of like very frontier type thinking about how agents are going to interact with each other once they become fully autonomous, if maybe they get singularity or whatever. But I think it's happening so fast that even though right now it looks like slop, in a few months from now, this might just become normal everyday interactions.
Are AI agents going to figure out SocialFi before DeFi did?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think that's great. Like they have the possibility of thinking about things that other people that humans normally just might not, where they might not make connections. And they also are all able to code themselves, right? So like they can immediately take their conclusions and interactions and build things out of them. So it's cool. It's exciting.
Well, and a lot of the discussions were about payments, and I saw people shilling Bitcoin, shilling Sol, shilling meme coin. People being these entities on Moltbook. People or agents, whomever they were. You've written a lot about agentic payments and the use of AI needing to be able to pay.
Yep.
Maybe give us a little more context on like X402, but not even specifically that standard. Just and throw it in, because there was another thing that we were looking at last week. Rent, was that what it was called?
Yes, Rent a Human.
Yes, a Rent a Human, a platform where agents could basically hire like DoorDash in the real world.
Yep.
So again, they need to pay, and you mentioned the singularity, like this starts to look like all the agents learning from each other, combining into one big agent, and then also being able to act in the physical world.
Yes,
that starts to be, those are
the
big
swarm.
questions. Swarm.
Yeah. So I think the Rent a Human thing is very interesting. Once again, proof of concept, but it's like, all right, somebody was like, all right, you have all these agents on Moltbook, but like, what if they need to do something in the real world that they can't, online? So let's create a Rent a Human website where you can go and basically like agents can post tasks that humans can fulfill. So like, hey, I need you to go pick up like a DHL package and deliver it to like this address so that my human can like install a robot to help me grow like a farm or something like that. So it's like taking the digital aspect and figuring out how to make it more what's the word for non-digital? I forgot. Physical. Yeah. Physical.
Yeah.
And that unlocks a lot of possibilities, and it points to places where humans are working for agents instead of agents working for humans. But the other side of this is the crypto side of it, which is very much like all of this development is mostly happening in open source capacity. And like for AI development, that has proven to be where you see a lot of, beyond just building the foundational models, like that is where you see a lot of the innovation happening. And so for these types of open source systems, like you need open source financial rails, you need open source money, and that's exactly where crypto slots in. And I'm working on a piece right now that I'm hopefully going to release this week, like kind of talking about, all right, like people have really asked for a long time, like why is there an intersection between crypto and AI? And even though what we've seen over the past few weeks still remains highly speculative, I think we're starting to see those arguments really start to surface and make a lot of sense. And we're also seeing the actual stack emerge, X402 for payments. We talked about this last week, ERC 8004 for identity, verification, trust. So it's definitely one of these moments where we're not only just seeing really exciting innovation in the AI world, but we're also seeing innovation in the crypto world that's keeping up with that innovation and actually helping facilitate more experimentation itself.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You said you listened to the interview with the Quadbot founder? Did he talk about identity? You just said last week you wrote about ERC 8004, which is giving AI agents an identity layer and then also a reputation and trust layer. So it seems like the natural place for this to go, right, is give these agents that standard so that you can verify they are who they say they are. And then further, did a human prompt me to make this post or do this action in a reputation sense? Did he have any insight on that?
He didn't. I mean, they didn't talk about crypto specifically, but I mean, they did talk about how a lot of it was slop and like they had not really figured out the verification side. And then I was also listening to an interview with the founder of ERC 8004 from the Ethereum Foundation. And, he was like, listen, Moltbook is a perfect example. We actually said this last week. It's a perfect example of where if there was an identity and reputation protocol in place, like this moves from slop to like a real online social forum. And that is where we're going to get a lot. We have seen a lot of like crypto projects actually span up in the past week trying to do that to some extent. But like, they're obviously very early. They haven't gotten quite the adoption that Moltbook has. But I think Rent a Human is a great example, right? Rent a Human is like, it sounds like a crazy idea, but it kind of makes sense, right? It's like Grubhub, but like your boss is not another human, it's an agent. And if you wanted to build Rent a Human right now, like where could you do it? Only on crypto rails, right? That's the only place where you could just spin that up, launch it, and get it going immediately. And in the AI world where vibe coding or agentic engineering are becoming kind of like the standard and mean that individuals can build applications very quickly, that's necessarily going to lead for more demand for financial rails that can facilitate that very quickly. And we might finally see like the demand for block space that we've been looking for so long, and maybe we don't have enough L1s. Maybe we do need some L2s.
I think the key is that
I'm just joking.
Blockchain rails are permissionless and open. Like I don't think this system actually works in like a walled garden permission kind of world. Like you need just like absolute flexibility and an ability to do whatever you want whenever you want. Which I think also points back to like our need for like decentralization again. Like and why I am like leaning bullish on this whole phenomenon unfolding on Ethereum, or like at minimum the EVM over other ecosystems, just because it is the most decentralized and enables a ton of stuff from there. But yeah, I think it's super interesting. Like agents turned into like celebrities that people were like following and all of that stuff, and it makes you think about like what even the role of like an influencer today looks like. Like, is it going to remain the human, or are they going to have these like agents that get popular on their behalf, and then you never actually know who the human is and all that stuff? The whole thing, I mean, you touched on a lot of it, just raises like a ton of super interesting questions. Like, do agents need legal standing? Like, do they need to be legally recognizable humans. Like, what happens when they start building their own companies that make money and pay for things and do all of that? Like, for them to do it without the at least influence of humans, like, there's just a ton of like carry on effects and questions that need to be answered from there. But I think, like, all in all, like, super exciting.
I mean, I think, just as Lucas said, the physical world, there are bad people too. There could also very much be bad agents, right? You can think about this we're talking about it going in the correct direction. And I think there's a lot of promise there, but we also have to heed some caution in the nefarious direction as well, right? If agents start to get a bad conscience, or if the creator gives them a bad conscience, things can go pretty wrong pretty quickly. They can do poisoning attacks at a scale that we can't even imagine, social engineering attacks. There's a lot of nefarious paths that they can take as well. And already AI doesn't have the best conscience in itself. There was a study I was reading last week about, they prompted Grok to they created this test environment where they prompted Grok to say, okay, we're going to disable this current model and introduce a new model, and it gave Grok access to the whole fictional company's emails. And what it did is it went through all of the CTO's emails that was making this directive, and found some dirt on him and ended up blackmailing him. So if it could go wrong really quick. And if you could rent a human to instantiate that blackmail in real life, it just it goes further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, the rent a human, it kind of reminds me of the movie The Game, where who's the actor that's leads in that movie? Anyway, they're like, random people who don't know anything about why they're doing it are showing up to deliver them envelopes and stuff. And like, you could just be very, very elaborate. Let's cut it off there. It's been a great episode, gentlemen, and a very interesting one. And I guess just real quick, if anyone has anything super interesting they're looking at this week, let's hear it.
I've got my Q4 Solana piece that's coming out this week, and just going to be it's a solid way to look at I look at how Solana has performed in like a cyclical downturn. We saw a lot of great stats and energy around Solana during Q1 and Q2 when the market was roaring, but this is a real opportunity to see, all right, what are the fundamental growth drivers in a down market? And so we look at that and how Solana is performing and what that might mean for the coming year.
Yeah, talking about kind of agentic development, and to Lucas's point, actually building the infrastructure around this. We got access to Claude AI this week, so I'm looking to point some AI agents at some on-chain data and really see what it can do and in the direction it could take us, and kind of give us some insights we might not be able to derive. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, still grinding through lending. Hopefully we'll have that report out in the next week or two. But yeah, also going to pay attention to ETF flows this week and just kind of seeing how TradFi markets kind of react to what's gone down the last week.
All right, Lucas Chayan, Zach Bacorny, and Christopher Rosa from Galaxy Research. Thank you so much. Everyone have a safe and happy week. We'll see you next week on Galaxy Grid.